Magic Earth. Chapter 5. The End of Lies. The snow fell in silence, yet there was no peace on that white field. The wind swept down from the north, bringing a chill that seemed to cut even through thought. Jack clenched his fist, his fingers stiff with ice. Before him, endless rows of soldiers formed a circle. 3 armies, 3 banners, and in the center, only him and Spes. The standards hung heavy in the wind, the blue of Arrow's winds, the pale gold of Mutar's forms, the gray of Nopsum's mines. None of them looked human now. They were machines of fear, standing motionless, awaiting the order of their kings. Jack looked at Spes. The man seemed calm, but there was something broken in his eyes. The dragon wasn't coming. Since dawn, Jack had waited to hear that distant roar, the sound that saved Eldoria on the day the castle fell, but the sky remained empty, only the whisper of the wind and the clinking of armor. "Why isn't he here?" Jack asked in a raw whisper. "You called him, didn't you?" Spes took a moment to answer. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the sunlight was lost among the mountains. "I called him, yes," he finally said, "but he cannot come." Jack frowned. "What do you mean, cannot?" Spes turned to him, his face etched with exhaustion. "The dragon is made of magic, Jack, and you are the opposite of it. Where you stand, magic fades. The dragon feels it and does not dare approach." Jack stepped back, not understanding. "Are you saying that I prevent him from existing?" "You prevent him from being controlled." Spes nodded slowly. "Here, magic dies. He will not cross this silence." A shiver ran through Jack's body. Everything he thought about himself, about being a drained, a mistake, a failure, now twisted. He wasn't empty merely from lack of power. He was anti-magic itself. The armies began to move. From a distance, the Mage-Kings watched from the hillside. Iroh, rigid as marble. Mutar, smiling with irony. Nopsum, with a cold, distant gaze. None of them showed any rush. They knew they would win. Jack swallowed hard. "Then what are we going to do?" he asked. "Face them?" Spes took a deep breath. "No, we are going to surrender." "What?" Jack reeled back, incredulous. "You want to give yourself up, after everything they've done?" Spes placed his hand on Jack's shoulder. The gesture was firm, but not rough. "Sometimes surrender is the only way to make the enemy listen. Trust me." Jack hesitated, but he saw something in his eyes that he hadn't seen since they met. Conviction. Spes slowly raised his hands. The soldiers advanced in waves, circling the two. Jack felt the cold metal of a spear press against his chest. The world shrank, just the sound of breathing, the falling snow, and a heart beating too loud. "We surrender!" Spes yelled, his voice echoing on the ice. For a moment, the entire field seemed to hold its breath. Then, like a contained roar, the sound of weapons lowering filled the silence. The Mage-Kings descended the hill slowly, wrapped in thick cloaks. None of them cast magic, only stares. Arrow came first, with Mutar on his right and Nopsum on his left. Spes looked at them, and before anyone spoke, he turned discreetly to Jack and muttered, "When I start talking, say nothing. Just observe, and remember what you see today." Jack nodded, his heart tight. He didn't know it yet, but this would be the day the Mage-Kings would stop looking like gods and reveal themselves as merely men. The Mage-Kings stopped a few paces away. Behind them, commanders from each army formed a semicircle of iron and leather. No arcane gestures, no glow in their hands, just heavy capes, cold in their gaze, and the certainty that victory had been theirs since dawn. Iroh spoke first, his voice like the wind that no longer blows. "Do you surrender to the authority of the 3 kingdoms?" Spes didn't avert his face. "Not to the authority, to the presence. Authority demands honor. Muhtar let out a short laugh. Always so theatrical, Thomas. Jack looked up when he heard that name. Spes didn't move. My name is Spes. Nopsam tilted his head, weighing words as one weighs coins. Not among us. Among us, you are Thomas, the apprentice who thought he could surpass masters, who chose disobedience over order, and was exiled so he would not be. He searched for the word. Contagious. Spes smiled, without joy. Contagious is what you call anything that threatens you. Words are walls, Nopsam. You've always been excellent masons. Iroh gestured for two captains to approach. They came, but stopped at Spes' signal, a raised empty hand. Not out of fear of magic, but because every syllable that came from him seemed to carry years of hidden secrets. Before you take us, I will speak, Spes said. Here, before everyone, with the snow as a witness. Because this snow will remember. Muhtar rolled his eyes, impatient. Speak, and end the spectacle. Spes took a deep breath. Then he pointed to each of them, one by one, like someone naming sculptures in a gallery. You are a sham. To Muhtar. Your castle is not stone. It is a curtain. The grandeur you display is maintained by a dozen hidden mages, feeding illusions night and day so that the people see marble where there is mud. To Nopsam. Your master of minds does not sleep without covered mirrors, fearing his reflection will tell him the man before the glass is smaller than the whispers he collects. To Aero. And you, King of the Wind, no longer have the breath to extinguish the candle in your own hall. You govern by inertia. You let habit rule for you. A murmur rippled through the ranks. Some soldiers exchanged glances. The discomfort was visible on their faces. No one likes to discover that the pillars supporting them are hollow. Iroh held his gaze, unblinking. Words. What do you intend with them? Nothing but the truth. For years you decided who could grow and who should disappear. To those born with a greater breath of strength you promised tutelage. You offered cages. Some were killed with beautiful sentences. Others, sent far away, far enough to become legend. That is what you did to me when I began to touch a power you could not name. Nopsam narrowed his eyes. And yet, you returned. Because the world changed in the place you threw me, Spes said, and his voice grew quieter, as if recalling a winter within winter. The unknown lands are not just ice and sand. They are hunger, resentment, and thirst. And when the soul drinks of that for too long, it becomes something else. The exiles learned to survive on what was there. Cold, silence, and remnants of magic the wind carries. They drank what was left. They reshaped themselves. Their flesh resembles ours, but their eyes do not. They have not forgotten the 3 thrones that spat them out. Muhtar made a move to step forward, but restrained himself. Empty threats. Warnings, Spes corrected. Soon, you will see forces you do not comprehend. I came to prevent what germinated out there from falling here like a harvest of steel. I came to save you, and if necessary, to kill you too. A dry silence opened between the words. The cold felt heavier. Iroh inhaled through his nose, thoughtful, and when he spoke, he did so without raising his voice. You will have the chance to repeat all this before the council. Until then, you will be held under guard. The boy will stay with me. Jack felt the weight of the sentence like invisible shackles. Spes turned his face slightly toward him, and in the man's eyes was the same firmness from before the surrender, a silent warning. Trust me. 2 captains approached. They placed their hands on Spes' shoulders and led him away. Jack was surrounded by guards of Iroh's blue standard. No spark of spell cut the air, only boots on the ice, cold metal, old discipline. The procession moved toward the road, leaving behind a circle of footprints and white breaths. High on the hill, A banner snapped in the wind. The snow continued to fall, as if wanting to cover those words before they could take root. But it was too late. They were already in the soldiers' boots, in the captain's eyes, in the silence of those who listened and pretended they had not. The procession moved across the frozen plain. The wind now blew sideways, dragging fine snow that streaked the ground like living ashes. Jack walked between two guards from Arrow's army, his hands bound, but his thoughts loose, fleeing everything. Behind him, Spes walked with slow steps, his head held high, as if the cold couldn't reach him. There was no pride on his face, nor fear. Only the distant look of someone who had crossed many prisons before arriving at this one. The silence was strange. None of the Mage-Kings spoke a word. Muhtar, with his golden mantle that undulated like living silk, seemed bored. Nopsam watched everything like a scholar before a rare animal. Iroh, in the center, walked steadily, without looking back. The wind, which once obeyed him, now merely struck his face. Jack, in the midst of that silence, tried to understand what had happened. Spes, or Thomas as they called him, had been one of the kingdom's greatest mages. The name was in books in the Eldoria library, in the legends Theodore told. But here, between chains and snow, this man seemed more human than any of the kings who imprisoned him. High on the eastern wall, already close to Arrow's castle, bells began to toll. The city was preparing to receive the prisoners. Residents crowded on balconies. Children were hoisted onto their parents' shoulders to see the procession. To them, this was justice, the punishment of a traitor. But Jack felt the opposite. He saw in it the repetition of an old lie. The castle's main gate opened with a metallic creak. The procession entered. Iroh ascended the steps first, followed by Muhtar and Nopsam. Spes and Jack were led to the Great Hall, the same Hall of Winds where, just days ago, swords floated before Theodore's chest. Now, the place was cold, with no flames in the torches, only the gray light that entered through the window slits. Spes was forced to his knees. A guard tried to make him bow his head, but he refused the gesture with a simple look. Iroh descended the throne steps and approached. "You call yourself Spes now," the king said, in a neutral voice. "The name doesn't change the crime." Spes replied calmly. "Sometimes the crimes of kings change the names of those they accuse." Muhtar came closer, moving his mantle. The hem dragged snow and dust. "Still sharp," he said, almost admiringly. "But where is the power? Where are the great tricks of the mage who defied the council?" "Dead," Spes answered, "just like yours." Nopsam intervened, his voice slow and melodic. "You claim to have come from the unknown lands, that there are forces rising against us. Why would we betray ourselves by believing that?" Spes looked at him and smiled sadly. "Because you never believed in anything but your own throne. And now you will pay the price." The hall fell silent. The sound of wind hitting the windows was the only noise. Iroh for an instant seemed to hesitate. There was doubt in his eyes, something Jack noticed. But Muhtar broke the moment, impatient. "Enough words. Guards, take him to the dungeons. Let him wait there until we decide what to do." Spes was pulled away. Jack tried to follow, but an iron arm stopped him. "The boy stays with me," Iroh ordered. "He is too dangerous to run with the mage." Jack looked at Spes one last time. The man turned his face just enough to murmur, "Observe, Jack. True power is not what they claim to possess. It's what they fear to lose." Those words remained trapped in Jack's mind as he was led through the castle corridors. He was locked in a stone room with a narrow window and an unlit fireplace. There, alone, he heard the guard's footsteps fade and the distant sound of snow hitting the roof. Then he realized something. Even surrounded by stone, the air seemed to vibrate, as if the fortress itself remembered the truth Spes had spoken. That night, Iroh convened a secret meeting. Jack, hidden behind the ajar door of the corridor, heard the echo of voices. It was the king and one of his counselors. "Extract everything you can from him," Iroh said, in a low but firm tone. "I want to know what he plans, what he saw in the unknown lands, and if he is telling the truth about this coming force." "And after, Your Majesty?" the counselor asked. There was a short pause. "Then, extinguish him." Jack felt his body freeze. His heart seemed to beat into the void. Spes would be killed, and with him, perhaps, all chance of understanding what was really happening in the world. He knew what he had to do, but he didn't know how yet. Night fell over the castle like a heavy veil. No torches burned on the balconies, and even the wind seemed contained, as if afraid of waking something too old. Jack looked out the narrow window of the room where he was held. From that height, he saw only the white expanse that surrounded Eldoria, a frozen plain that vanished into the dark. And further, much further, were the unknown lands. Spes had spoken about them. A place where the condemned were cast out, a graveyard of the living, where cold and hatred had shaped new creatures. But now, recalling his words, Jack realized that this wasn't just a warning. It was a confession. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor. 2 guards passed, talking in low voices. The king ordered the interrogation to begin at dawn. "I heard the man was one of the ancients. Ancient or not, he'll talk. Everyone talks." The voices faded. Jack took a deep breath. The cold of the stone passed through his clothes and into his skin. He knew he couldn't wait for dawn. The memory of Spes's voice echoed in his head. "Observe, Jack. True power is not what they claim to possess. It's what they fear to lose." What did Iroh fear to lose? The throne? The appearance of power? Or something deeper? Control over his own kingdom? Jack began to think of paths, of doors, of guards. Every second was a risk. But he also knew that if Spes died, everything would end here, and the world would remain trapped in the lie he had denounced. He picked up an iron shard from the corner of the wall, perhaps an old part of a broken hinge, and began to scrape the iron against the stone. A low, rhythmic sound. He didn't have a complete plan, just a will to escape. In the tower, he insisted on the stuck window. A low crack came from the swollen wood. The moisture of the cold had yielded. Jack held his breath. It wasn't a miracle. It was rust and winter. Freezing air streamed through the gap. The door lock, tested with the shard, was worn. It gave way with force and skill, between pressure and patience. He slipped out slowly, peering down the corridor. Torches burned faintly, and snow drifted in through the ceiling cracks. He took his first steps toward the dungeon. As he walked, he thought about what Spes had said about the unknown lands. There, the exiles drank the remnants of the world's magic. They became something new. And what is new always returns to claim the price from the old. Jack imagined what it would be like to live in a place where time didn't pass, where the cold killed bodies, but not resentment. Spes had said the exiles changed form. But what did that mean? Human creatures? Demons? Or mages without a soul? When he descended the spiral staircase that led to the dungeon, the air felt heavier. Iroh's castle seemed to have roots, and they plunged deep into stones that resembled ancient bones. The cell corridor was empty. Light came only from a lantern hanging on the wall. Jack heard a breath. Spes was there, sitting, calm, as if waiting for him. "I thought you wouldn't come," Spes said without surprise. Jack knelt, nervous. "I came to get you out. They're going to kill you, Spes." "I know." The man smiled. "But sometimes it is in death that the beginning is planted. I won't let it happen." Spes looked at him with a strange glow in his eyes. "Then perhaps the world has a chance." The silence of the dungeon was almost alive. Every drop of water falling from the stones seemed like a clock marking the remaining time before dawn. Jack kept the lantern low, the wick trembling, as he watched Spes in chains. The iron was cold and damp, the floor covered with ice. "They're going to kill you at sunrise," Jack said. "I heard Arrow order it." Spes didn't seem surprised. "It's always been this way. Kings fear what they don't control." Jack looked around, searching for anything he could use. A key, a crack, any way out. But there was nothing. Only stone and silence. "We can't stay here," he insisted. "There has to be a way." Spes watched him calmly, like someone who had already accepted all the world's sorrows. There is always a way. It is not always the right one. Jack ran his hand over the shackles and realized the latch wasn't sealed by magic, but by rust and carelessness. One of the guards had forgotten to properly lock it. He forced the clasp with a stone. The metal groaned, broke, and Spes freed his wrists. "Done," Jack whispered. "Now we need to get out before—" A distant noise cut the air. Footsteps. Voices. They looked at each other and ran in silence. No tricks. Light feet on the damp floor. The corridor was narrow and dark. The air smelled of mold and forgotten time. They climbed the stone stairs to an inner courtyard, where the moon poured a thread of silvery light onto the broken columns. Spes paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. "There are secret exits in this castle, old tunnels, used when Ira was still a man of courage." "Do you know the way?" Jack asked. "Enough to escape." They crossed the courtyard, hunched over, skirting shadows. The sound of footsteps echoed on the upper floors. The guards were making their rounds. Jack felt his heart beat so loud he was afraid of being heard. They reached the old storage room, where the stone floor opened into wide cracks. Spes pulled up a grate covered with snow. "Here," he said. "This tunnel leads outside the walls to the south road." "South?" Jack seemed confused. "Shouldn't we go north to see what's coming?" Spes turned and faced him with seriousness. "What comes from the north doesn't march in a line, Jack. It spreads. It circles the world before it falls. Not even I can stop them. Not now. Every step away from the north is one breath more of time." The phrase hung heavy in the air. They entered the tunnel. The passage was dark and damp, the ceiling low. Jack walked ahead, feeling the walls, while Spes followed, breathing with effort. "How long have you been planning this?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. "Since the moment I came back," Spes replied. "But I didn't know who would help me get out. Now I know why destiny brought you." "Me?" Jack turned, not understanding. "The emptiness you carry is not weakness. It is balance. A world dying from an excess of magic needs someone to remember what silence is." The tunnel ended in an opening covered by roots. They pushed the exit open and emerged into an open field, covered in deep snow and pale light. Behind them, the castle seemed asleep, unaware that its prisoners had vanished. Spes looked north. There, the dawn was tinting the sky blue and red, a color that didn't belong to the natural world. Jack followed his gaze and felt a shiver. "What is that?" "The beginning." Spes then pointed south. "And also the end, if we stand still. Let's go." The two began to walk through the snow, without looking back. The night seemed to watch them, complicit and silent. And in the distance, the north wind roared, as if announcing that soon the whole world would awaken to what slept beyond the mountains. The early morning stretched on, cold and silent. Jack and Spes continued to walk across the open field, leaving tracks that the wind quickly erased. No sound but the rustling of snow beneath their boots. The world seemed suspended, as if time were waiting for something to happen. Jack looked at the sky. The northern clouds were strangely still, and a faint line of bluish light still flickered on the distant horizon. "So that's what will come from the north?" he asked. "The exiles?" Spes took a moment to answer. His eyes were downcast, as if the words were too heavy to be spoken. "Not just the exiles," he said finally. "They found something there. Something born of despair itself." "What do you mean?" Jack frowned. Spes stopped. The wind moved his hood, revealing part of his tired face. In ancient times, Elyon tried to unite all the forces of magic in a single being: light, matter, and mind. All creation, however, generates its reflection. In the shadows of Elyon's attempt, the opposite was born: Noyle. Jack repeated the name with a shiver. Noyle. "The inverse of Elyon," Spes continued. "Where Elyon sought order, Noyle found instinct. Where there was purpose, he created hunger. Noyle had no fixed form. He appeared human, but his body was covered in short black fur, and his eyes were golden slits, like those of an animal that sees in the dark. When the exiles found him, they saw in him a god who accepted them. Fed by hatred, they molded themselves in his image. Their skins changed. Their faces became animal masks. Today, there are no more men among them, Jack. Only creatures that remember what men could have been." The wind blew harder. Jack hugged his own body, trying to contain the cold that came from within. "And they come for revenge?" "They come by instinct," Spes said. "But revenge is the name we give to instinct when it learns to think. They do not march like armies. They spread like a mist. They circle before they fall." Jack was silent, and then he thought of his family, of Theodore, of Lys, of Melanie. He saw his sister's smiling face, the glow of the tavern's flames, the sound of laughter in the house. A terrible weight fell on his chest. "They are there, in Eldoria," he whispered, "and the armies are in the north. If Noyle comes from the north." Spes turned to him, his gaze grave. "Your family can no longer be saved, Jack. When Noyle moves, the kingdoms will fall before the sun notices." "No." Jack took a step back. "It can't be too late." Spes tried to touch his shoulder, but Jack recoiled. "I have to go back," the boy said. "I need to warn them, get them out of there, anything. Listen, Jack." Spes's voice was firm, but there was sadness in it. "Noyle spreads. Where he arrives, the land changes, the air changes. There is no border, no shelter. What he has touched becomes part of him." "Then let me become part if I must," Jack whispered. "But I won't stand here knowing they are alone." At that instant, the wind shifted. A dull roar crossed the plain, a deep, distant sound, coming not from the north, but from the south. Jack and Spes turned. On the horizon, a dark fog advanced, covering the ground like a living sea. Within it, shadows moved, many, countless, crawling, running, blending into one another. The mist rose to the sky, swallowing the stars. Jack looked, breathless. "Is that the north?" Spes answered with his voice barely a whisper. "No, it's the south. Filaments of them have already circled the world. They are already here." Jack took a step forward. "I'm going back." "It's too late," Spes said, raising his voice. "If you go back, you will die with them." "Then so be it," Jack replied, "because dying far away is the same as not living." Before Spes could stop him, Jack ran in the direction of the plain, back toward the north, disappearing into the snow and the wind. Spes watched him until his silhouette vanished. Then he looked again at the approaching fog, took a deep breath, and murmured to the void, "May magic protect you, boy, because the world that is coming will have no mercy." The southern fog roared, and the dawn finally began, pale, cold, and distant, as if the sun too was afraid to rise.